Welcome back. Last week I showed you my receipts, how Bitcoin Depot collected roughly 35% of my money while I was actively being scammed. Today, we move from the transaction to the people behind the infrastructure. And here's the man behind the curtain. His name is Brandon Mintz. His company, Bitcoin Depot, went public on the NASDAQ in 2023. In 2024, he was named to Forbes 30 Under 30 list. Today, he runs one of the largest cryptocurrency ATM networks in the United States and North America. Brandon's company alone operates over 8,000 Bitcoin ATMs. Some regulators are finally starting to pay attention, but in most states, including mine, there are still no limits, no refunds, and no protections. In Iowa, the Attorney General investigated crypto ATM operators, including Bitcoin Depot, and found that the vast majority of reported losses totaling millions of dollars were linked to scams. In response, companies like Bitcoin Depot have maintained that scam usage is not representative of their business. I found an interview on the podcast called Thinking Crypto that Brandon did back in 2023 with the host, Tony Edward. I'm going to play a portion of that interview for you so you can hear Brandon's own words as he explains who uses his machines. But before we hear this, you should know something. In 2024, the Iowa Attorney General investigated Bitcoin Depot. They contacted the top 50 users in Iowa, representing over 2.4 million in transactions. Of the 34 who responded, every single one confirmed they had been scammed. 100%. Not one legitimate user. Let me repeat, every single one was a scam. Keep that in mind as you listen to this.
A kind of weird question for you, and it's something I've been thinking about for years, and I've talked to quite a few folks about it, and that is, there are different demographics in the world, right? It goes without saying. There's different people, different walks of life, who are familiar with different levels of technology, and they trust different things, whether it be trust banks, they trust ATMs, or they trust exchanges. So could you tell us a bit about the demographic that uses the Bitcoin ATMs, and who are they, especially like in the United States? Are they like the older folks who are, hey, I know how to use an ATM, I can buy some Bitcoin on this? Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, great question. So there's really three different buckets I like to break it into. The first one being that cash economy bucket made up of people who just prefer to use cash. Sometimes they use it for certain transactions, sometimes they use a card for others. But also, most importantly, people who are underbanked and unbanked, which is close to a quarter of the US population. Actually, a lot of people don't realize that. And according to a few studies out there, those are the people who are using crypto the most. I've read studies that say, people within that demographic have adopted crypto, own crypto, more than 2 times as likely as just the general population. And then the other buckets are really anyone who wants pure convenience, doesn't mind paying a markup, goes to TravelX in the airport, buys drinks from convenience store versus having to go all the way to the grocery store, uses a cash ATM instead of going to the bank, just normal convenience purchases in life. Maybe they got fed up with waiting on verification from the exchange, which exchanges still have a lot of problems getting people through, even for small dollar amounts. And then lastly, as crypto has been adopted more and more, the baby boomer demographic has come into play as well. So you have people who just aren't that great with technology. They don't want to try and figure out how to use an online exchange, and they want a familiar experience, something tangible that they can go see, touch, and feel.
Sure.
That gives them a lot more comfort than just completing the transaction through the website. Especially with all the news that has come out the past year, A lot of people may feel you go to a website to buy Bitcoin, they could just disappear or say, hey, we're not allowing withdrawals. You go to a Bitcoin ATM, you're getting your Bitcoin essentially instantly. There's a lot less to worry about. So those are really the three buckets that make up our user base.
Well, there's a sudden transition for you. For those on audio only, this just went from Brandon's podcast interview to now watching this horse eat her lunch. Let me explain what's going on here. Lily, the horse, lives in this nice pasture, and she has graciously allowed us to come here to illustrate to you exactly what Brandon is trying to sell everyone. I just changed her name to protect her true identity. I'll let you know right now, his explanation is horseshit, and that's why we've come to this horse pasture on a very cold January day. I've got 3 silver buckets here representing the 3 demographics that Brandon calls financial innovation. But here in Lily's pasture, we call it what it is, horseshit dressed up to disguise what's really underneath. Oh, look, Lily left us some fresh raw materials to work with. This is what I came here to find. His corporate speak is designed to make exploitation sound like innovation. But these horse butt nuggets are what he's really hiding underneath his finished product. So, his first bucket, clients who prefer cash. He talks about the unbanked and underbanked, or people who just prefer to use cash. Brandon says close to a quarter of the U.S. population is unbanked or underbanked. Unbanked means they don't have a bank account due to an income too low to maintain an account balance, or that they don't trust banks. Underbanked means they do have a bank account, but still may rely on payday loans or check cashing services, etc., and disproportionately affects minority households and those with disabilities. It sounds compassionate and inclusionary, and regulators are reluctant to crack down on something that sounds like it helps low-income people. But according to the FDIC's 2023 survey, only 4.2% of U.S. households are unbanked, and another 14.2% are underbanked. So these households in the U.S. total about 18.4%, not 25%. So this serving the unbanked story is not just misleading, it's a lie. This bucket isn't full of underserved communities. It's full of scam victims he's pretending are legitimate customers. And here's the kicker. That same FDIC survey shows these households primarily use cash, Venmo, PayPal, and Cash App, not Bitcoin ATMs charging 20 to 40% fees. That's bucket number 1. Horseshit in a silver bucket. Looks good on top, doesn't it? But we all know what's underneath. The second bucket, convenience seekers. People who don't mind paying a markup for speed and ease. Let me tell you about the convenience of using a Bitcoin ATM. Remember the earlier episode where I showed you the 6 steps I had to go through to use this machine? You download an app, drive to the bank for cash, then drive to the nearest Bitcoin ATM, feed bills in one at a time, then go home and wait up to an hour. Then use the internet again to transfer the Bitcoin. That wasn't convenient. It was time-consuming, annoying, and it required internet access anyway. The very thing Brandon assumes baby boomers can't handle. This is predatory exploitation of people in crisis. There's bucket number 2, another silver bucket with the same horseshit underneath. The third bucket, baby boomers who aren't comfortable with technology. He says they want something tangible they can see, touch, and feel. What he doesn't say? 2/3 of all Bitcoin ATM fraud losses come from people over 60. They're not making empowered choices about cryptocurrency investment. They're being systematically targeted through romance scams, government impersonation scams, grandparent scams, and tech support scams, all of which direct victims to Bitcoin ATMs, specifically because transactions are irreversible and the physical machine adds false legitimacy. And Brandon takes his 30 to 40% cut either way. Bucket number 3. 3 silver buckets with all the same horseshit underneath. So these are Brandon's 3 buckets, 3 demographics, 3 types of what he calls legitimate customers. Except they're not legitimate customers, because here's what happened when law enforcement tried to help an actual victim. Now, Bitcoin Depot will remind you that scams target every financial service. We have terms of service. Users promise to only send money to their own accounts. This isn't representative of our business. But here's what is representative of their business. In April 2025, a scam victim in Benton County, Arkansas, lost their life savings to a fake jury duty scam. The sheriff's office seized the $14,120 from a Bitcoin Depot ATM, money they believed belonged to the victim. Bitcoin Depot sued law enforcement to get that money back, not to examine whether fraud occurred, not to help the victim, to keep the entire amount of money. And here's what they argued in their lawsuit, directly from the legal filing, and I quote, "The seized funds are property of Bitcoin Depot. Bitcoin Depot is the innocent purchaser for the value of $14,120 in U.S. currency. As such, Bitcoin Depot has an ownership interest in the seized cash and is entitled to possession of the cash as a matter of law." Read that again. Bitcoin Depot calls themselves the innocent purchaser, not the victim, Bitcoin Depot. Because they gave the victim Bitcoin in exchange, Bitcoin that immediately went to a scammer, they claim the cash now belongs to them, legally, permanently. That's the business model in black and white. A scam victim loses $14,120. Bitcoin Depot takes their 25 to 35% cut, let's say around $4,000. And when law enforcement tries to return what's left to the victim, Bitcoin Depot goes to court to keep all of it. And this isn't an isolated case. So far, they've done this in Iowa, Wisconsin, and Texas multiple times, fighting in court to keep money that law enforcement seized specifically to return to scam victims. So when Brandon Mintz says scams aren't representative of our business, the court filings tell a different story. Because if scam transactions weren't your business model, you wouldn't fight this hard to keep the money. Now, here's what Brandon didn't mention in that interview. He didn't mention that state investigations show 98% of transactions are scams. He didn't mention that elderly people lose their life savings at his machines every single day. He didn't mention that his company sues law enforcement to keep scam victims' money. And when confronted with all of this, Bitcoin Depot's response, "Scams target every financial service. This isn't representative of our business." Here's the counterpoint. Banks stop suspicious transactions. Credit cards reverse fraudulent charges. Venmo flags unusual activity. Bitcoin Depot does none of this, and they profit more when the fraud amount is higher. That's not inability to stop fraud. That's incentive not to. According to state investigations, up to 98% of reported transactions involving these machines were tied to scams. No legitimate business requires 98% criminal activity to survive. At what point do we stop treating this as incidental misuse and start asking whether their business model depends on it? Where's the protections? Where are the regulators? A few places are finally taking action. Spokane, Washington banned crypto ATMs entirely in June of 2025. Maine capped fees at 3% and created daily transaction limits. Nebraska and Iowa offer refund windows if you report quickly. But that's a handful of states out of 50. Most states have done nothing. 0 transaction limits, 0 refund requirements, 0 consumer protections. And Bitcoin Depot knows it. That's why they keep installing machines everywhere until regulators wake up. Brandon Mintz was featured in Forbes 30 Under 30, while state investigations found that up to 98% of reported transactions involving his company's machines were tied to scams. He calls it financial innovation. He calls it serving the underbanked. Courts call it lawful. Victims call it devastating. Bitcoin Depot calls it business. I call it horseshit on a silver platter. So here's the number one rule again. If using a Bitcoin ATM isn't 100% your idea from start to finish, you are being scammed and you need to walk away. Next time, I'll be talking to a fellow victim and we'll look at the twist on the classic playbook. This is the Romance Scam Rebellion. Thanks for listening.